Back, you're still watching The Globe on SABC News. I'm Simpiwe Ngwana. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, South Africans, as of Tuesday, the 7th of August, can move freely across all 9 provinces. President Cyril Ramaphosa says Cabinet has decided to move the country to level 2 of the lockdown. The ban on tobacco and alcohol sales has been lifted by the executive.
All restrictions on inter-provincial travel will be lifted. Accommodation, hospitality venues and tours will be permitted according to approved protocols to ensure social distancing. Restaurants, bars and taverns will be permitted to operate according to approved protocols as to times of operation and numbers of people.
Interprovincial travel is also back, as well as being able to go on holiday domestically. Those wanting to quench their thirst with an alcoholic beverage can do so whilst also enjoying a smoke.
Restrictions on the sale of tobacco will be lifted. The suspension of the sale of alcohol will be lifted subject to certain restrictions. Alcohol will be permitted for on-site consumption in licensed establishments only up to 10 p.m.
One can now enjoy good company of relatives and friends without breaking the law of the lockdown.
Restrictions on family and social visits will also be lifted, although everyone is urged to exercise extreme caution and undertake such visits that are absolutely necessary.
However, those who have a desire to travel abroad will still have to bear the pain of not being able to jet off internationally.
Current restrictions on international travel will remain in place. No gatherings of more than 50 people will be permitted. Among others, this includes funerals and religious events. Spectators will not be permitted at sporting events.
President Cyril Ramaphosa also says those who have been profiting illegally from this COVID-19 pandemic will face the full might of the law. Samkele Masego, SABC.
President Cyril Ramaphosa has announced that the country will be moving to level 2 of the lockdown from midnight this Monday. Tobacco as well as alcohol sales will be allowed subject to certain restrictions. In an address to the nation a short while ago, Ramaphosa said nearly all restrictions on economic activity will be lifted under level 2.
The move to level 2 means that we can remove nearly all of the restrictions on the resumption of economic activity across most industries. Economic activity will be allowed with the necessary and appropriate stringent health protocols and safety precautions in place. Therefore, the following changes will take place with effect from under level 2. All restrictions on inter-provincial travel will be lifted. Accommodation, hospitality venues and tours will be permitted according to approved protocols to ensure social distancing. Restaurants, bars and taverns will be permitted to operate according to approved protocols as to times of operation and numbers of people. Restrictions on the sale of tobacco will be lifted. The suspension of the sale of alcohol will be lifted subject to certain restrictions. Alcohol will be permitted for on-site consumption in licensed establishments only up to 10 p.m. Liquor outlets will be allowed to sell alcohol for off-site consumption from Monday to Thursday during the hours of 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. only. Restrictions on family and social visits will also be lifted, although everyone is urged to exercise extreme caution and undertake such visits that are absolutely necessary.
Joining us now to talk more about the President's speech is the South African Federation of Trade Unions Secretary General Zwelinzima Vavi via Skype. Mr. Vavi, very good evening to you. Great chatting to you. Thank you so much for your time. Welcome to the Globe.
Thanks, and good evening to everybody watching.
The popular sentiment is that this has been a long overdue speech by the President and, an announcement of the country moving from level 3 to level 2. Your views?
Well, when we were moved from level 4 to level 3, we in SAFTU argued very strongly that actually what the government had done was to pander to the whims of capital, which was piling pressure on the government to remove restrictions altogether. And that when you look at the meaning of level 3 and 2, we said that we have been moved to level 2 and that level 3 have been skipped, and to the great cost to the lives and the health of South Africa. So the announcement today would not surprise us, and except that there has been more removal of the restrictions in line with what the government sees as that South Africa have now reached the peak and that we are now in a downward trend when it comes to numbers of people testing and dying from HIV. I'm sorry, from coronavirus. My apologies there. The point that we want to make, though, is this. We issued a statement as SAFTU, and I see that NUMSA also issued a similar statement to caution against this premature celebration, in our view, that we have reached the peak, because we said our own experience indicate that perhaps more people were dying than we were accounting as people dying from the coronavirus. Our practical experience was that our people were dying before they were being tested. Our people were dying whilst waiting for the results. And the Medical Research Council own report seemed to suggest that actually we were undercounting the numbers of people dying by more than 60%. That remains our concern even today, that we must not rush into celebration when clearly during the epidemic government have been proven that it is unable to test and to make sure that the results come back in time instead of the 2 weeks or even more in some cases on parts of the Eastern Cape. So we want to caution against the early celebration until we have been assured through our practical experience on the ground that indeed we are off the peak and that we are now moving towards normality.
I suppose you're speaking from a health perspective, but then when it comes to the economic perspective, some more restrictions have been lifted. For instance, accommodation establishments are now allowed to operate. The alcohol and tobacco sales or sales ban has since been lifted. So this will allow more revenue coming into South Africans' pockets and as well as businesses and ultimately onto the South African fiscus. Should we celebrate in that regard?
We celebrate that only because we are seeing hundreds and thousands of workers losing their jobs, in particular in the liquor industry, in the agriculture, as well as in the tobacco industry. If government had a package, a stimulus package capable of ensuring that the job losses are limited to the minimum, we would have continued to call on government to remain with heavy restrictions on the selling of both tobacco as well as liquor. But in the light of the fact that government willy-nilly have completely failed not just workers in the tobacco and liquor, but across the board, workers are on their own. some economists are estimating that over 3,000 or 3 million jobs have been lost, and that we may lose 7% of our GDP as a result of the impact of the restrictions and the coronavirus in general. This is where we are concerned about. We are absolutely disgusted by the fact that government or the president was up to today still announcing that he is going to put together some plan negotiated behind the workers' back in some exclusive forum called NEDLEC that exclude SAFTU, the second largest federation in the country, and that exclude hundreds of non-governmental organizations, working class formations, ground forces of the working class across the length and the breadth of the country, and that some elitist clubs have failed 5 months after the disaster have struck to come out with any meaningful solution to the fact that our economy is approaching a depression, and we may lose up to 10% of our GDP as a result of that. And we think that that may not just be representing some recklessness on the part of the government, but it may be that our government simply have no idea of how we should respond out of the framework they have chosen, the framework of neoliberalism, a framework of austerity program, austerity even in the face of the pandemic. And we are absolutely condemning that to the harshest levels that you can imagine.
Now, one economist, Artad Montalto, writes that on a personal level, Cyril Ramaphosa is a collectivist, which in a cabinet sense means that he's a majoritarian, taking the majority view where consensus cannot form. He also writes that at present the securocrats and the microeconomic fiddlers and micromanagers have the majority, with the National Treasury and other more sensible voices being drowned out. And just picking out to this of this sentiment, what do you make then of the fact that President Cyril Ramaphosa did not really accede to public pressure and the potential loss of about 7% of the GDP, but really he listened to the National Coronavirus Command Council, and some say that it's the other way around?
I think we must again analyze this beyond just what the writer have said there. In our own experience, having been part of that alliance, the tripartite alliance is an unworkable amoeba club of people who are pretending to be representing the interest of workers on one side, and on the other side, hardcore capitalists representing the interest of big capital, and the other side, thieves who are taking advantage of even the existence of the pandemic, such as coronavirus, to continue feeding their bellies, even when our people are suffering like this. When you are facing that situation, and when you have a compromised leader who is compromised by the thieving of the private sector itself through illicit cash outflows, but who's also compromised and keep on being accused by factionalists within the movement, the ANC, of having stolen the last conference. And then who must now manage these contradictory, seemingly positions? Sometimes you have COSATU that seemingly present very meaningful progressive positions, and but which is not willing to back those through mass action. On the other hand, you have the likes of Tito Mbowenis, who are ultra-conservative and who are pushing for the maintenance of the status quo at all costs, including austerity, signing the IMF loans, and now working towards getting another loan from the World Bank in order to get restrictions on what South Africa can look at possibilities of using its fiscal and monetary space to develop and to protect jobs and to protect the economy. On the other side, we have a group of neoliberals and liberals, basically, who think that by tinkering on the outskirts of what we inherited from the colonial apartheid and capitalist order, you will be able to fix the crisis that is facing the working class. And that strategy has been tried of trying to be good to everybody in society, but eventually delivering to the ruling class. And that strategy have completely failed the workers. Look at what have happened now. Government claimed that it has a 500 billion rand stimulus package, when in reality, it has put aside through new money 174 billion rands, which represented a 3.4% of the GDP. Of that 500 billion it claimed, which was cost going to be getting loans and implementing even more stringent measures of austerity, only 50 billion went to the working class in the form of the social grants, and another 40 billion went to the working class in the form of the TERS or the UIF interventions. Just imagine, we have a 500 billion, only about 100 of that goes through to save the situation of hunger and unemployment that was getting out of hand and all of that. That on its own should convince any worker that the government acts first and foremost to defend the interest of the ruling class of the big capital before it looks at what it can give to the workers in terms of the bones falling from the tables of the master. That's the crux of the problem in South Africa. We have a government who acts all the time to protect the interest of the wealthy and which ignores the interest of the poor and the marginalized. Now, as a result of this, the workers are on their own in this situation. They are losing their jobs left, right, and center. Hundreds and thousands, and some people, as I said earlier, estimate that we've lost 3 million jobs in this period. And that's a disaster for us going forward. And that's why, by the way, we're going to resist any attempt to use the restrictions to stem on our right to protest against the job losses, against the fact that government is implementing the austerity programs that further drives millions of our people deeper into poverty and unemployment.
Mr. Vavi, you so eloquently diagnosed the problem, but let's look into finding solutions. How do you think the government should repay the billions that it has borrowed from the international financiers, seeing that the fiscus is severely constrained, seeing that South Africans have lost their jobs, seeing that the GDP has already contracted to alarming levels? What do you think should be done? And should the government go back to the IMF or any other financier with their cap in hand to ask for more funding insofar as ensuring that South Africans' livelihood is sustained, given the fact that South Africans, have lost their jobs? You've just mentioned that South African workers are alone in this particular pandemic. What should the government do? And do you have any suggestions with regards to any new sources of fiscal resources that can keep the government machinery going?
We didn't have to go to the IMF, World Bank, African Bank in the first place. We have no business in going there when South Africa have sufficient resources internally that it can use if we had political will to raise resources. And let's give you a few examples. We have put on the table the following suggestions for government to look at, and government is scared, have no political backbone to look at those mechanisms. Let's look at within the government. According to a top treasury official, South Africa is losing anything between 35 and 40% of its procurement budget to tender fraud, to overpricing by the private sector, and to these tender premier, now COVID premier schemes that seeks to rake for themselves billions and billions. And that alone is about 350 billion rands annually. We are allowing big capital, and unfortunately the president has been fingered himself at the personal level through his involvement with the private sector companies. But we are taking out between 175, or they are taking out between 175 and 400 billion rands annually. out of the economy into the safe havens elsewhere. And if we were to tap into that money, if we were to have a government that will stop illicit cash outflows, we would not need a mere 70 billion rand from the IMF, because we will have up to 400 billion rand.
Okay.
And third, we have said that this government must introduce a wealth tax, a solidarity tax, in order to close the yearning gap between the rich and the poor in this country. The government have refused to do so. We have asked the government to stop continuously dropping the corporate taxes, which are now sitting at 28%, whereas corporate taxes were about 54% in 1994 or on the eve of democracy. Corporates were willing to pay those amounts of taxes for a small minority covered by the apartheid regime, but they have successfully lobbied that corporate tax must be reduced to now 28%. If we had a government that was willing to lift that corporate tax again, introduce a more progressive taxation system even at the personal level, that will give us billions and billions of rand to ensure that we change the face of Alexander, of Sintueja, of Deep Throat, and of many informal settlements who make South Africa to be two countries in one, a Santin and the deprived, marginalized, and poverty-stricken people who are living in squalor around all of our cities, be it in Cape Town, Johannesburg, or Durban.
All right. Mr. Vavi, thank you so much for chatting to us. We appreciate your time.